Yo, welcome back to the channel, boys and girls. In today's video, we are doing a 6-month review on my Tarmac SL8 Pro frame set / bike. And in this video, we're going to be discussing the price of the bike build, the weight, the cons, the pros, of course, the riding dynamics, and why I will not be selling my SL8 frame set. And I will, unfortunately, probably end up selling my beloved Giant Propel frame set. So without further ado, let's begin. So first off, let's talk about price. How much did it cost me to build up my Tarmac SL8 Pro frame set? So the frame set itself retails for $3,500 USD. The wheels on here, although I've used a variety of wheels, that ran me about $1,500 USD. The Groupset was another $1,500. The Sram Red spider-based power meter was $800. The EXS Aerover handlebars, that cost me $450. The saddle, Bartape, tubes, tires, etc. cost me about $300, giving us a grand total of about $8,000 USD. Now, of course, that does not include tax or the time and labor that went into building the bike, which of course I did myself at home. Now, to be fair and full disclosure, some of these items I were able to find a deal locally here in Chicago. And then of course, the variety of wheels that I've used with my SL8 were sent to me from various brands for testing and review. However, despite the fact that this bike build cost me $8,000, believe it or not, that's still $1,000 cheaper than an equivalent full bike for this Tarmac SL8 Pro on Specialized website. So even though my bike is $1,000 cheaper, it is also lighter than that full bike build on Specialized website. And the components like the wheels and the handlebars are actually far better in my opinion compared to that $9,000 bike build. So this is where I'm at currently with my YouTube channel. I went from exclusively only reviewing affordable Chinese bikes to now splitting $1,000 hairs on $9,000 bikes. Next up, let's talk about weight. So in its lightest weight weenie form, that includes the number 6 45/50 wheels, the Galfer brake rotors, the EXS Aerover handlebars, and then that Selle Italia SLR saddle. We're looking at right at about 7 kilograms all in. And that includes, of course, the pedals, the computer mount, and the power meter. Now, if you were to weigh this out the industry standard way, we're looking more like 6.6 or 6.7 kilograms, which is really good considering the type of components and quality that I have on this SL8. Next up, let's talk about some of the cons on this Tarmac SL8. And these cons are more or less philosophical and subjective, so just kind of keep that in mind. But the first con I can think of on this bike is the perceived lack of stiffness. Now, what I mean perceived lack of stiffness, what I mean is the bike is not a noodle. It is plenty stiff, but just how it actually feels out on the road because it is so comfortable. There are times when you feel like the bike is not stiff. But even though it doesn't feel stiff, it's plenty fast. There'll be times I'll be looking down at my numbers and putting the power down and you realize that the bike is still responsive. It just doesn't have that sort of excitement when it comes to that perceived stiffness. Another con I have, and this is just a personal one for myself, is just the overall brand cachet and the lure of Specialized. It's just not really an exciting bike, if I'm being honest. Everyone knows about the Tarmac. You show up to any coffee ride and either you're going to fit in or they're going to look at your bike and say, okay, we don't really care, because they're pretty much everywhere at this point. And especially here in Chicago, where we have 2 flagship Specialized shops, which by the way are great as far as customer service goes. And a lot of the employees are within the cycling community. You can see them all over the place. Just the overall feeling of Specialized is just not as exciting as they were in years past. I think the best way to describe this bike is it kind of reminds me of like an MPC bike, meaning it does everything well. It's a jack of all trades. It's just not really a master of any one of them. And it just doesn't really make for a over excited feeling anytime I hop on this bike. Like when I'm on my Giant Propel, as soon as I take that out of the house, I'm excited to hop on it. No diddy. And it's just more of an exciting bike. It's more exhilarating out on the road when you're descending, when you're sprinting. But again, that doesn't mean that the SL8 is not a bike that has performance. It just doesn't have that level of excitement that invokes me the same way that my Giant Propel does. So all in all, with the cons here, this bike is just so well balanced. It's just so good at doing everything that in turn, it just doesn't always feel exciting to ride on a day-to-day basis. Next up, let's talk about the pros of this Tarmac SL8 Pro frame set slash bike. So number one is the obvious one, is the weight on this frame set. So for my size 56, that came in at 827 grams, which is a solid weight for an aero slash all-around frame, especially of this quality. When it came to the fit and finish, superior. Definitely the best bike that I've ever built up from a quality perspective. The bike build was just so easy to do. There was no creaks, there's no rattles, there were no sharp edges in the carbon anywhere inside the frame. And then when you pair that with a BSA bottom bracket, a threaded bottom bracket that's easy to install, as well as SRAM eTap, it just made building up this bike exceptionally enjoyable. I was able to do it in only just a couple of hours, to be honest. And then another pro of this bike is having that local dealer support, like I mentioned, is very critical considering you're spending $3,500 for this frame set. And although I myself have never needed to use that local support, it's good to have that in your back pocket should something go wrong with your frame set or your bike. Next up, let's talk about riding dynamics. But before we talk about those dynamics, let's first talk about this idea of perceived stiffness. So just because you can design a frame to be incredibly stiff, that does not automatically translate to a net positive riding experience. And what I mean by that is, unless you are a professional athlete being paid to race your bike and provide results, you absolutely do not want a frame that is all out stiff for everyday bike use, especially as a recreational rider. Your back's gonna hurt, your teeth are gonna rattle, and it's just not going to be an enjoying experience on the bike day in and day out. And number two is, we've seen now that with brands like Specialized and some of these other Western brands, they have proven with their carbon layup and their attention to frame design that you don't need a frame stiffness in the absolute sense to manufacture a world-class bike. You just don't need it. So while stiffness is a selling point to a certain degree, having that be the primary focus and selling point of your bike would, in my opinion, would raise a little bit of a red flag. Now, at this point, when it comes to riding dynamics, I've done all of my usual testing with this bike over the last 6 months, 3,000 miles, whatever the case may be. But I've done, of course, my weekly fast group rides. I've done 6-hour rides on this bike. And the Tarmac SL8 Pro is so comfortable. It's by far the most comfortable bike I've ever ridden. And it's comfortable without being flexy. So again, the bike is plenty stiff. It's just somehow comfortable. So I don't know what sort of magic sauce Specialized is using. And that's why you are paying the premium versus some of the other brands, particularly in the Chinese market. But it's so comfortable because of just the attention to detail and how the frame is designed. So you figure you have a smaller bottom bracket area, you have skinnier seat stays, you have a sloping top tube, which allows the seat post to be exposed more. So all these things allow for more comfort on the bike, but yet the grade of carbon that they're using allows the bike to still be stiff. You just don't feel it the way you would with, say, like a Giant Propel. The bike is just plenty fast, and while it may not feel fast because of how comfortable it is a fast bike. Of all the wheels I've used on this bike compared to some of my other frames, somehow this bike, using my bro science, it still somehow comes out just marginally on top as being just slightly quicker than all the other bikes that I've tested. Now, again, I haven't done any actual proper testing or done any like data. That's just sort of the riding sensation that I've gotten using this frame. And one of the things that's interesting with this SL8 frame, with the design, is this bike is the most stable that I've tested when it comes to crosswinds. My Giant Propel is probably the worst. So again, something that Specialized is doing with their design of this frame really lends this frame to have really good stability in the crosswinds. Whether you're out of the saddle sprinting, the power is still immediate, despite the fact this bike is so comfortable. And especially when you're climbing, this is where this bike really shines. And it's interesting to me because both the Propel and the SL8, they both climb really well. The Giant Propel, it climbs well because of just how perceivably stiff it feels. Like, it feels like every single pedal stroke, the power is going down through the frame and getting you to where you need to go. Where with the SL8, it's just a little bit more agile, a little bit more nimble. And of course, because it is a lighter frame, it just loves to dance going up the climbs. And yeah, I can really attest to the fact that the SL8 is by far the best all-around bike that I have ridden. And finally, guys, why I'm not selling this bike, and while I will probably end up selling my beloved Giant Propel. So really there's two main reasons why I'm not going to sell this bike, despite me mentioning before that I would. So number one is the SL8 is still the benchmark when it comes to modern road bikes, or at least one of the benchmarks. Whenever I build up a new bike, especially in this last year, the main question I always get online is how does such and such bike compare to the SL8? So it's clear that even in 2024, moving into 2025, people are still checking in for the SL8 and they're still excited for that frame, enough to the point that that's still the comparison benchmark to all other road frames on the market today. And the second reason why I'm not selling this frame is because, and this is kind of a spoiler alert, is because my brand new Tavello Aero, it's just that good. It's that good in terms of quality and performance wise that it really could replace all of my road bikes currently that I have in my fleet, except for my SL8 when it comes to riding dynamics. The SL8 is just the best all-around bike that I've ever tested. It's not as dynamically exciting to ride as my Giant Propel, and it is basically an MPC bike, but it makes sense for like 90% of riders on the market today, whether you are a racer, whether you're an enthusiast, or you're just a recreational rider who just enjoys to have nice bikes and be out there with your pals out on the road. But the thing is, Chinese bikes are also getting really good at both frames and wheels, and they truly have become a threat to the majority of my bikes that I have, especially with my Giant Propel, except again for my SL8. My prediction for 2025 is, unless you're looking at one of the best all-around frames on the market today, like a Tarmac SL8 or an all-out driven aero frame like a Scott Foil RC Pro, honestly, you might as well just look at one of the Chinese brands on the market on the higher end of that spectrum. And honestly, after buying my SL8, I don't really know what mainstream bike I want to buy for next year. I was interested in the Factor Ostro Vam, but honestly, my new Tavello Aero really solves that problem along with my Giant Propel because the Aero is just that good, and I will do a separate video on that later. I also was interested in the Scott Foil RC Pro, but that's a frame set that's hard to get. The bike fit is kind of finicky, especially with the accessories being hard to purchase, and it's just too niche of a frame to offer up any solid resale value. So really, in the end, guys, I'm going to keep my SL8. I will probably end up selling my Giant Propel and the majority of my road fleet. At the end of the day, focus on your fitness, optimize your position on the bike, get a set of high quality performance wheels, and you're already like 90% of the equation in. So I'll probably do maybe a longer term review after this, but after 6 months, I really love this bike. Like I said, dynamically, it's not as exciting as my Propel, but that doesn't mean that it is the leaser of those two bikes. It's just a fantastic bike. And just the trend that we've seen with Chinese bikes and some of these other more affordable options becoming really, really good, it really does make it difficult to keep the majority of my bikes. At this point, I'm thinking I probably will just end up keeping my SL8 for long term, as well as my Tavello Aero. But more details on that Tavello Aero at a later time. So that's going to wrap up today's video, guys. As always, questions, comments, and concerns, please feel free to leave them down below, and I will check you guys on the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.